You are listening to the serialized audiobook podcast for Blood of the Stars, an epic fantasy novel written by Karyne Norton, read by Paeter Frandsen and Karyne Norton. If you can't wait to listen to the whole audiobook, or if you want a signed physical copy, go to karynnorton.com/shop to get the lowest cost by buying direct. You can also find the audiobook on Audible, Barnes & Noble, and other standard retailers. Please enjoy the next installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. Chapter 14. Bondmate? Aeliana frowned, no more certain over who Lukai was now than she'd been before the introductions. Yes, now get inside the cave. Silmar drew the vines back farther. He ushered them all into the dark until the vines could swing back in place behind him, effectively hiding them from view. A small lantern rested on a rock, the dim light from its fire casting more shadow than glow. "What's a bondmate?" Cyrus asked. Lukai held out his right hand, but this time he angled it palm up to reveal a dark mark, like a teardrop. Aeliana gasped, holding out her hand with its matching mark before she could think the action through. Lukai locked his fingers with hers, and warmth spread between their palms, as if the marks conducted heat when they touched. He smiled, his eyes never leaving her face. When two people are bonded, it strengthens the connection between them the more they're with each other. Silmar huffed, picking up the lamp to lead the way through the cave. When Aeliana broke away from Lukai's gaze, Veldon's features were tight. "Don't mind Silmar's pessimistic views on love." Aeliana dropped Lukai's hand like a hot coal. "Love?" Veldon's tension dissipated as he laughed. "Bonds were originally used for protection, sometimes for a parent and child or comrades in war. The desire to protect a bondmate overruled any fears. When used between spouses, the bond gained a depth unlike any other. Over time, it's evolved into something shared mostly between couples, either as a part of their wedding ceremony or their betrothal. Which is why you should have let me swap watch with Veldon tonight," Lukai called out to Silmar, bending forward to grab his bag. "I sensed she was in danger. It was driving me mad." "You've sensed it almost daily for the last 4 years, Silmar grumbled, his voice echoing back to them against the cavern walls. "Considering she was with Arvid and Vera," Veldon said, "she probably was in danger daily." Lukai frowned, and the lamp's light caught on a silver object hanging from a leather cord around his neck. A starlock? He tucked it under his shirt and followed Veldon, his broad back blocking most of the light. Aeliana and Cyrus quickly joined the procession. "The royal family is one of the few left who use bonds from childhood," Lukai said over his shoulder. "The older a bond, the stronger it is. It's meant for protection more than love, but the two often go together like starlocks and progenies. Your mother knew from the start that you would be in danger. Bonding is only one of many things she did to protect you." "Was the Starbridge another?" Cyrus asked from behind Aeliana, his tone unreadable. Was he bitter? Or merely curious? "Yes," Veldon said. What had originally sounded loving now felt selfish. Aeliana's mother had put protective measures in place for her, but at the cost of so many other lives. "Our bond allowed me to sense your well-being, even across the barrier." Lukai turned, placing a finger on his matching mark. The same sense of warmth that had been present when Lukai held her hand returned. She rubbed at the mark, a wariness settling at the edges of any comfort she might feel. She'd felt that warmth before, several times over the years. Now that she knew he'd been checking on her, she wasn't sure if it felt reassuring or invasive. Lukai sucked in a breath. I can sense you even more. His excitement wasn't contagious. Now that we're not divided by the barrier, I'm guessing the bond will work far better. Sensing my well-being isn't protection, she said. You didn't do anything even though I was in danger all the time. True. He winced. Before you returned, I couldn't protect you. The bond simply would have told me if it had been broken. The question sat on the tip of her tongue, but she was too afraid to ask what it would take to break a bond. Death? Was she now tied to this stranger for life? The ground sloped downward, the temperature growing cooler despite the thickness of the air. The layer of sweat Eliana had built up outside the cave cooled her down too well. She shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her waist. A mix of voices came from ahead, the light from Silmar's lantern shining brighter around Lukai's form. Only the light wasn't just coming from Silmar's lantern. Welcome to our Bamboo Island base, Silmar said. The cave's path opened up to a small cavern. Half the room held bedrolls, and snores drifted from a large lump in the middle of one of them. In the center, a petite young woman with light brown skin and short black braids frowned at biscuits cooking over hot coals. An equally short, older man ate slightly blackened versions of what was on her pan, which explained the acrid stench in the air. Eliana's stomach growled, reminding her the night was nearly over, and it was probably close to breakfast. Another woman, pear-shaped and aged with laugh lines, sharpened swords and arrow tips on whetstones in the corner, sparks dancing at her boots. The sight of a white bow leaning against the cave wall made Eliana's arms itch to hold it, to feel the firm wood in her hand, the reliable tension in the string. There'd been something peaceful about learning to shoot from Cyrus, even though she couldn't imagine using the skill to hunt. From the look of this group, these weapons were meant for war, not food. At first, all eyes turned to Silmar, Veldin, and Lukai, but it was the second look taking in Eliana and Cyrus that made everyone go still. The room grew quiet except for the sizzle of batter on a pan, then broke as the sleeper gave a violent, choking snore. Veldin sent a flick of water from his webbed hand toward the woman cooking. I'll need at least 4 of those, so don't you dare burn them, Kendallin. Her pretty face screwed up into a scowl as she turned back to the biscuits, wiping away the water glistening on her long lashes. Our mission has been accomplished, Silmar announced. We head for the mainland immediately. Does Mavis know she's here? The booming voice startled Eliana when it came from the small man near Kendallin. I assume so. Silmar sighed and tugged at the short strands of his beard. Arvid and Vera came with her. Murmurs spread through the small entourage. And Rildon? The man pressed. Silmar hesitated. They said he was dead, but it felt like a lie. The room grew quiet, faces troubled. The woman sharpening arrows dropped the one she held and approached Eliana, a hand outstretched. She scanned Eliana as if starved. You look so much like your mother. Son, protect her. She placed a hand on Eliana's cheek, then chin. Eliana took a step back, eyeing the woman's strangely cropped hair and trousers. Iris was your mother's maidservant in Selenov's Sungazer. Silmar rushed through the introduction while grabbing a pack from the wall's edge. She witnessed your crossing. She's one of the few survivors of the old Selenoft. The others went back to their duties, this time with a sense of urgency. Even the man who'd been sleeping rolled up the bedding as he yawned, but their eyes strayed toward Eliana, and their conversations became hushed whispers. I can help you get ready, love. Your skirts will slow you down, as will this. Iris gently pulled on Eliana's hair. I have extra clothes you can wear. Would you like me to cut your locks, too? No, Cyrus answered for her, his hands flying to his own long hair. Iris laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber in an easy way that defied everyone else's haste. We'll see how long you both last. What happens when we get to the mainland? Eliana asked. Traveling with half-lights might be safer in one sense, but this small group seemed likely to attract trouble. Eliana watched as Lukai folded up dozens of arrows and knives in blankets and tied them together in bundles. Or maybe they went looking for trouble. Eliana shuddered. Now that you're here, we'll head north, join the rest of the new Selenoft. Those of us who survived Mavis's rampage years ago, when underground. Iris rifled through a bag, pulling out fine, unfamiliar clothes and passing them to Eliana. We thought you'd be here moons ago. It's a relief to know you're all right. She patted Eliana's cheek, then nudged her toward a sheet hung up as a makeshift dressing screen. Was that why they had so many weapons? Had they been prepared to fight for her? Eliana watched the others more closely, noting that in addition to Silmar and Lukai, the shorter man and Kendallin had matching cords tucked into their shirts. Only Iris, Veldin, and the larger man had bare necks. And yet Silmar had said starlocks were becoming rarer. They'd not only been prepared to fight for her, but they'd sent several progenies. All because she was the daughter of a well-loved high priestess? It didn't seem to fit. Vera's strange story about curses and prophecies came back to Eliana. She couldn't trust anything that woman said. But these people weren't telling her everything either. Eliana changed, then rounded from behind the screen, pulling at the trousers as if they might grow a skirt. She quickly pulled her robe on over it. Iris fussed over her a moment longer, then stood back with a critical eye. Well enough. You won't pass for an average Vendarin with all that hair. Some will think it disrespectful to the stars, but we can braid it and hide it in your hood. Eliana ran a hand over her waves. Disrespectful seemed like a bit much. I thought you didn't worship the stars. Iris's hands went to her hips. Doesn't mean we don't respect them. Eliana didn't want to stand out, but she wasn't sure she could cut her hair. Not yet. It was the pride of a Lorvandan. During desperate times, men and women cut a lock of hair to lie out in the stargazer as an offering to the stars. Otherwise, it was shameful to have hair as short as Iris's. The man who had rolled up the bedding stood, towering over Eliana until she took a step back. He bent to give Iris a peck on her cheek. I'll load up your herbs next. His voice held a gentleness Eliana hadn't expected. Don't be rude, Iris said, swatting his arm. Eliana, this is home. Home, this is Eliana. Good to meet you, Eliana said, unsure how the Vendarans greeted one another. A handshake? A curtsy? He ducked his head in her direction, but said nothing more before ambling toward a stash of supplies in the corner. Iris leaned close with a grin. He's formidable in battle and intimidating at first glance, but don't let him fool you. He's a giant puppy. Eliana's gaze swept over the room, taking in their varying shades of skin. In Lorvandis, she'd stuck out with her copper tones, whereas Cyrus's pale skin had been more common. Here, he looked almost sickly against the warm browns. What about the shorter man? Eliana asked. The stranger still chewed biscuits as he bent over a map, his trim gray beard belying his youthful frame. Jasperus, Iris said. Loud and a bit of a know-it-all, but he tells the best stories. He missed his calling. Could have made a fortune with a traveling troupe. Eliana smiled, even though she was already forgetting names. They seemed like an odd bunch, but with only 7 of them besides Cyrus and herself, maybe she would find her place among them. Cyrus sat on a large rock, where Lukai's hands slid over Cyrus's wound. Lukai took his time, his touch gentler and more exact than Silmar's had been. Every place his fingers brushed on Cyrus's hand and arm showed pale, freckled skin. If scars remained, they were almost impossible to see. Cyrus stared in wonder, but at this rate, it would take all day for Lukai to finish smoothing out the scars left by Silmar's healing. After a moment, Lukai patted Cyrus on the back, then stepped away to pack his bag. Cyrus walked over to Eliana, holding up his hand and examining it in the low light in wonder. He said he'll finish tonight. Eliana's hand grazed the back of her neck. She longed for that kind of relief on her wounds, but the idea of volunteering for someone to use magic on her felt like madness. Which route are we taking? The short, older man called out to Silmar, his focus still on the map. Hadn't Iris called him Jasperus? We may need to take the pass. The room went still once more. The larger man stood, his hair nearly grazing the cave's ceiling. He'd been the one to kiss Iris, and Eliana thought his name might be home. We can't get an army of 10,000 men through the pass. His eyes darted everywhere in the room, but on Silmar, his tone still soft despite his urgency. Army? Cyrus's voice rose. Are you at war? Eliana tried imagining a group that large. On Harvest Day last year, she'd seen from a distance 1,000 gathered in a town's square. But 10 times that? Eliana couldn't even picture it. We're starting one, Veldon said. It's the only way we can rescue Eliana's mother from Mavis. Meeting up with the army to take the trade route would be ideal, Silmar said. But we might have to take it slow for now. The pass is a shorter way through the mountains, and it will allow us to meet up with the army farther east, beyond the mountains, without having to keep their pace. Traveling with Eliana will require extra stops and training periods. Silmar turned to her, his scars deepened by the shadows in the lantern light. She squirmed under his attention. She'll need to be weaned from blood magic. A wave of gasps traveled through the others, Eliana's uneasiness deepening. Silmar glared at them, and the flurry of activity resumed. Even Iris and Veldon moved away to help pack. Silmar turned to Eliana and Cyrus. I'll do my best to answer what questions I can, but some will have to wait for the road. I'm not sure what reinforcements Arvid and Vera have here. The island has seemed empty this last year, but Mavis always seems to be a step ahead of us. If she doesn't already know you're here, she will soon. We need to be long gone before that happens. Why? Aren't you trying to go after her? Eliana asked. We need to meet with her on our terms, not hers, with our army behind us. Silmar hesitated, his impatient gaze scanning the group's progress. You should know that Mavis and Emerys are sisters. Sisters? Eliana echoed. So this woman is my aunt? Yes. An aunt who imprisoned your mother to gain more power. She's risen to control all the sun-gazers in the nation by the unholiest of tactics, including blood magic. More specifically, branding. She imprisoned her sister? Cyrus asked, his face screwed up in horror. With his 10 siblings, he probably had a better understanding of family than Eliana, but even she found the news disturbing. I'll admit it's not a widely accepted story. Silmar's eye twitched in irritation. Emerys has been missing as long as Eliana. Anyone who claims to have seen her in the eastern provinces also goes missing, which only confirms the rumors instead of putting a stop to them. The rest think your mother's grief over losing you and Rildon made her go mad. They think she's dead or that she's run off. But that's because they don't know she sent you both away for your safety, and they weren't there to witness her capture. But you were? Cyrus pressed. Silmar's scars puckered with his frown. Some things don't need to be witnessed to be known. The point is, we are on the brink of war. Mavis's supporters couldn't care less if she kidnapped Emerys. In their minds, their high priestess can do no wrong. They'll find a way to justify her actions. They tell the royal family they're loyalists, but the recreants know they consider themselves zealots. Recreants? Cyrus asked. That would be us, Silmar said. Loyalists think of recreants as dissenters and traitors. It's a bit of a political term for people who oppose the Elenesses, the royal family. It may have started out that way, but as Mavis rose to power, the recreants supported Emerys's efforts to stop her sister more than they opposed the Elenesses. How is she rising to power if there's a royal family? Eliana asked. Silmar snorted. The royal family is too busy levying taxes and planning parties to see what Mavis is up to. They consider her a spiritual influence for the country, but they'll probably hand over their crowns before they realize what's happened. Most loyalists are honest when they support the Elenesses. They just don't realize the royal family is slowly relinquishing power to Mavis and her zealots. Before Emerys disappeared, she was working on a way to suppress Mavis's growing power. She'd discovered something just before Mavis kidnapped her. We were hoping Rildon could tell us what it was. He frowned again.
Either way, she knows how to defeat Mavis. We're determined to rescue her and expose Mavis for the fraud that she is."
"You and the 10,000 soldiers you mentioned?" Cyrus asked. "What kind of army are you up against?" Veldin joined the group, slipping a pack on Cyrus's back without waiting for permission. The others followed, having already made quick work of packing up the entire camp. "Mavis's supporters are nearly equal to ours," Veldin said, "but there's probably 5 times that in the eastern provinces who have no interest or opinion on the matter. If we could expose her and sway them—" A few others grunted their agreement, showing they'd all been carefully following the conversation. "Well, it's not likely," Veldin said. "I don't know what Lorvandans are like, but Vendarans prefer turning blind eyes to the trouble at hand until those eyes are ripped out and eaten by Durakin." He pressed 2 fingers together near his eye, then popped them apart with a squelching sound. Cyrus shuddered, making Veldin laugh. He smacked Cyrus's arm with his sticky webbed fingers. "By the time all of Vendaris admits there's a war, it will be too late." His humor faded, and the others grew somber as well. Cyrus took a step closer to Eliana. "Who's Durakin?" Veldin leaned in to whisper. "You don't want to know."
"Time to go,"
Silmar said. Eliana still hesitated. She trusted these people more than she did Arvid and Vera. But there were too many gaps in the story. "So we rescue my mother, and she stops Mavis?" Silmar grunted.
"It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the plan. Mavis has been delving so deeply into blood magic that she can't return from it."
Instead of anger, Silmar's face held something closer to pity.
"Emerus is one of her brands. We'll need to cut out the brand mark. Otherwise, Emerus won't be able to leave Mavis, let alone stop her."
"What's a brand?" Eliana asked.
"We can discuss it more on the road,"
Silmar said, guiding them toward an unfamiliar path out from the cavern. "It's similar to a bond," Veldin said as she and Cyrus fell in line behind him.
"I thought those were for marriage."
Cyrus narrowed his eyes. "Wait, no. Protection? How to explain the difference?" Veldin's profile faced them as he tapped a finger over his lips, eyes squinted in thought. "In the case of marriage and betrothals, servants of the sun bond couples with the tiniest drop of blood. It's fused to the palm with heat and light from a somatic progeny." "The half-lights who adjust the body?" Cyrus asked. Eliana turned to him in surprise. He'd taken in more of Silmar's lessons on magic than she had. Silmar spoke over his shoulder.
"Yes, they basically grow the bond between the couple using the blood as an anchor. It connects the couple emotionally and spiritually, even when they're not physically near each other."
"And that's not blood magic?" Eliana scratched at her palm, the dark red bubble suddenly more ominous than it had ever been.
"It's a fine line," Silmar admitted, "defined more by intent than the presence of blood. Mavis, when she uses someone's blood as a brand, she fuses their blood to her skin, but doesn't share any of her own. The connection is still just as powerful, but it only flows in one direction, allowing her to steal their power if they're a progeny and use them to do her bidding. Bonds are a mutual decision made by a couple or the parents who care for them. It's a sharing of power that's unable to be abused. Brands are often forced on someone. The recipient doesn't even need to be present for the brand to take effect.
Cyrus and Eliana exchanged a nervous glance.
I suspect she took Emerus's by force and branded her for her power,
Silmar added.
She was always jealous of Emerus's noetic abilities. At most, a progeny can master two spokes without blood magic. I can't help wondering if her goal is to master all points on the spokes of the wheel of magic through the brands she controls.
Can she do this with anyone's blood? Cyrus asked. Silmar nodded.
If she wanted to, but people aren't exactly offering their blood. It's a sacred thing to trust someone with your blood.
Veldon shuddered. Sun's fire. I would hate to be her brand. They're essentially puppets. Arvid and Vera's torture would seem like a game in comparison. Eliana reached out to grip the cave wall, her knees suddenly weak as she held up the line of travelers behind her. All this time, she'd thought her guardians were building up her blood for their own use. But what if they'd been grooming her for something bigger? Something far worse. Eliana! Lukai called out from behind her in concern. Veldon and Silmar turned back, the lamp's light highlighting the question in their eyes. I know why Arvid and Vera were willing to leave me. Eliana swallowed hard, forcing herself to look Silmar in the eye. They're taking my blood to Mavis.
Chapter 15. It was almost the sun's peak when Larkos sent word that Starspeed was ready to set sail. Starspeed had been gifted to Karyne when he'd turned 16, more of an offhand attempt at making him feel special, since the year was more about Enla's induction ceremony as queen in training when she turned 18. A silly celebration, considering she'd been training for it her whole life. It was just another year. Another reason for his parents to waste money on a party. But he did like the boat. The three-masted bark had been brand new, tested only by the builder, with polished timber and watertight melted pine pitch caulking. Every time the tightly woven sails snapped in the wind, it brought Karyne back to her maiden voyage. He'd taken her out almost 100 times in the 7 years since, whenever Enla agreed to spare him, and sometimes when she didn't agree. In a surprising show of solidarity, Enla rode with Karyne in a horse-drawn carriage to the docks. His hopes were tentatively high because he still hadn't heard from Lenda, but when they rounded the corner where the main street met the wharf, Lenda stood in front of Starspeed. She beamed, 3 trunks and 4 maidens by her side. Karyne groaned as he slid from the open carriage. You realize how much she's going to slow me down? One small woman has the power to take the wind from your sails. Enla's composure remained queenly atop her seat as hordes of people crowded around to see what the royals were up to. Karyne still caught her smug tone. If she hasn't found sea legs since we were children, she'll spend the entire voyage puking down in the hold. Enla laughed, then hunched forward to whisper, Lean into the bond. It's a blessing from the sun, not a curse. Karyne clenched his jaw. He'd known this was the reason Enla wanted Lenda to go along. Time spent together would enhance the bond. It would feel natural, and as Karyne fell for Lenda, he would probably wonder why he'd ever resisted in the first place. He waved off the footman and pulled his bags from the back of the carriage, slinging them over his shoulder. The mark on his palm itched as he wrestled with his sister's plea. There was something that felt off about bonding, like a love potion that took away his choice or control. Leaning into it sounded like giving up all of his desires and dreams. She'll be a distraction. For you or your crew? Enla's smile still didn't falter. Was she trying to make him jealous? He glanced at Linda. Her eyes were like a baby Winex's, large and unblinking, taking in the bark's height as she leaned back. Short blonde locks curled all around her head, an artistic creation that would be ruined within moments aboard Starspeed. She wore an impractical blue silk dress that wouldn't last through the voyage, but it matched her eyes, which were now in front of Karyne, as if his perusal had drawn her close. "I'm looking forward to our time together." Red lips parted in a smile he knew to be falsely humble, a practiced look with fluttering lashes. Still, his heart picked up its pace as she toyed with the cord of her starlock where it dipped below her low neckline. He turned back to Enla, cursing the bond's ability to work even when he didn't want it to. "I'll return soon, hopefully with answers." He gave his sister a knowing look. She wanted answers about the strange woman's magic, maybe something to quench his curiosity and help him settle back at home as Throne Warden. He wanted so much more. "May the sun's light always shine upon you," Enla said. Karyne stiffened. It was a common farewell among the nobility, especially for long voyages. But it had also been a daily adage for Enla, Karyne, and Riverin in their youth. With the gathering crowds, he couldn't hold back the reply, even though it had been 2 years since he'd used either phrase. "And may the star's light always guide you." The words came out stiff, but Enla nodded her approval. Karyne turned around sharply, the farewell suddenly tainted by memories of Riverin. He nodded at Linda like he would a member of his crew, then walked to the planks, already feeling some of the tension leave his back as he boarded his home away from home. "Larkos can show you to your room," he shouted over his shoulder. It was just as well that Linda take the captain's quarters. He preferred sleeping on deck with the crew, under the stars. The twinge he felt over her safety was short-lived, as usual. Linda was a destructive somatic. She could protect herself far better than Karyne could protect her. By the time Linda's trunks had been brought on board and 3 of her 4 maidens dismissed by Karyne, despite Linda's protests, the last of the sails had been unfurled and the anchor raised. "Good to see you, Eric." Karyne ruffled the stable boy's hair, letting loose a few stray pieces of hay. The boy grinned, then schooled his features as he glanced at the other sailors. "You too, Captain L&S." Karyne leaned in. "I had your wages sent to your mother this morning. Figured the baby might come before we're back." Even as Eric thanked him, the boy's features pinched, and he glanced back toward land. Karyne made a mental note to check on the boy's homesickness in the coming days. The first voyage was always the hardest. For now, he took the helm and guided the ship out of the harbor, the practiced motions calming. Instead of passing the wheel off to Larkos, he remained, partly to avoid Linda, who hovered as though ready to pounce the moment he was free, and partly because he hadn't told Larkos about their first stop in the marshes. The sun was nearly ready to sleep when they left the major inlet to L&S and rounded the western coast. Karyne shouted orders to drop anchor and lower a boat port side. Larkos raised an eyebrow, but the crew knew better than to argue or ask questions. Linda, on the other hand. "What are we doing? Where are you going?" Her hands twisted, a crease forming on her brow. "We have one more stop. It's your last chance to go back if you'd like." Karyne smiled, the thought too good to be a true possibility. "I doubt you want to deal with sickness and storms." "But I—" She turned to study the men as they worked, gnawing on her lower lip. "We're actually closer to the palace now than we were at the docks." He tried not to sound too hopeful. "You're already looking a little green." Her face sagged as she temporarily lost her hold on the serene smile she maintained to maximize her beauty. Strangely, He found the vulnerability more attractive. He clenched his jaw and looked away, hating that their bond could make him feel an attraction he didn't want. My maid brought herbs. Her voice held a stubborn determination. Very well. He threw a leg over the ship to catch the rope ladder. But why are we stopping? She pressed. Even Larkos leaned over to hear Garen's reply. I have additional cargo to pick up. After leaving Larkos in charge, Garen had a couple of men row him inland, where he hopped from the roots of one mangrove tree to another until he reached his hideout. The swamp gas was particularly bad in today's heat, forcing Garen to cover his nose to hold back a gag. He expected to hear light steps on the wooden boards, maybe even the woman's voice if she was one to talk to herself. Instead, he heard heavy footfalls and a deep baritone. He unsheathed his dagger, cursing himself for not tuning in to his surroundings earlier. Before he could get a read on the situation, the woman called out, No need to skulk, Garen. You're among friends. He straightened, not ready to believe her, but then a familiar bearded face peered over the boards. Riverin held out a hand in some sort of greeting, but Garen hardly noticed. His gaze rested on the black X, newly tattooed and bleeding on Riverin's forehead. The humiliating and permanent mark of a criminal.
I hope you enjoyed listening to the latest installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. If you enjoy listening to this narration, you might also enjoy listening to Paeter's podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. Thanks so much for listening.